third time's a charm. Always a mystery if it's working. Let's see,
If we dance awkwardly enough at the camera, does that make it go faster?
I don't know. Let's see. It is April 15th. I did schedule it at the right
Somebody
time.
just said 7 p.m. enthusiastically in the chat.
7
So
p.m.
East Coast.
Okay. Oh, East Coast. Yeah, we're live.
Oh, we're live.
Welcome to
To
BCC
BCC All.
All. Woo!
Yay!
Okay. So we're on
We're
our
not getting
third
any better at that.
episode. We're not getting any better at that. We will eventually. We just need to trust the process and know that it's working. Also, I'm going to make this image smaller because I didn't do that last time either. All right, y'all. We're so excited. This is our first episode of the guest, but before we do, let's do some quick catch-ups. Who are we? What are we doing? What's going on here? So if you haven't tuned into BCC All before, this is a show where we talk all about the job search from a non-traditional background, coming from a boot camp or self-taught. Our last couple episodes have focused on who the heck we are, so if you are very confused, go check out those earlier 2 episodes on my YouTube channel to get a little bit of background on that. But this episode, Becca, I'm really stoked for this one. This is a topic that we're both very passionate about. How about you give the intro?
Cool. So my name is Becca Rosenthal, by the way. I'm an engineer.
That's Becca.
What up? I could sing it. I'll stop now. This is annoying even for me. Okay, cool. So today we're going to be talking about kind of the process of the job search and the nuts and bolts of what happens when you either finish the boot camp or kind of do your self-learning stuff and decide, all right, I'm ready to start applying. And now what? It is a roller coaster. And we're going to dive into what that looks like, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
As we always say, the highs are very high and the lows are very low during the job search, which is why BCC All was created and why the bootcamp office hours at the Microsoft Reactor were created. But before we dive into our topics, give a little, let's do some catch-ups. Should I start? I'll start. Or do you want to start? Okay.
I can start. I've had a weird week.
Yeah, you have had a weird week.
I've had a weird week. So my beloved 94-year-old grandmother passed away last Friday of COVID/congestive heart failure and being 94 and having had a stroke over Christmas and like all of that. And it's been really hard and interesting to deal with the whole process of grief over coronavirus. Because in every other world, somebody dies and you get to the airport as soon as possible. My mom's family, they're all in Connecticut. You get to the funeral and we couldn't do any of that.
Yeah.
So we were just kind of here, and there's been a lot of like family Zoom calls and attempting to like sit Shiva remotely is super weird. We also did a funeral via conference call where the phone was in the rabbi's pocket.
Oh my God.
And we could hear all of the wind, and we were sitting in our like sweatpants and, slippers and like crowding around a Bluetooth speaker, watching it going, this is so sad. And then we talked to like my uncle afterwards, who said that being graveside and not being able to hug his children who were standing 6 feet away was just, if not more, traumatizing.
Yeah.
So in many ways, we dodged a bullet by not being able to travel to a social distance funeral. It's very weird.
I even saw that you had some issues even just getting an obituary put in the paper because there's less people working at the local paper right now. So there's all these weird issues that we're now finding living in this remote life that I'm sure many people are being affected by, but oh my goodness, what a strange thing to have to deal with right now.
Yeah, it's been weird, but like the thing I take solace in is that she was a 94-year-old woman who was very much on her final legs. She was in hospice DNR. It's what was supposed to happen. So it doesn't make it easy, but at the same time, like it's a lot easier to grieve a person whose life was supposed to end at that point. And I'm just grateful that I'm quarantined with my family so that I can, my mom told me I crawled right into her bed and like, I don't have to social distance from my own mom. So it's little things like that that I'm really grateful for.
You let us know what you need from us. That is so tough. I actually thought of you on a similar note because of your Jewish educator background and all of the chatting that we did last week about the Rugrats Hanukkah special and the Wienerville Hanukkah special. The Passover, oh my God, I'm like, what day is it? What month are we in? Truthfully, I'm like,
You're
what
very
day
Jewish.
is I know it's Wednesday because BCC All is happening, but I have a very good friend, Laura, who lives over in New York, and she also works for I think for a synagogue or a Jewish nonprofit, and they've been doing bat and bar mitzvahs remotely through Skype and Zoom and all these different sources. So it's just so interesting to see how different communities beyond the tech community that we're just so used to being in a bubble of are having to kind of like, beyond schools too, just religious ceremonies in general going online. It's so strange and difficult.
And it's interesting though, because some synagogues are doing YouTube live services, so it's output only, and other synagogues are using Zoom so that the congregants can see each other. And they're all differently personal or unpersonal. Oh, the other family-related thing that happened this week, on the other side of the family, is my college-age cousin is taking a computer science class, and I've become his tutor.
Yes.
And I have never felt so useful in my life than helping somebody with beginner Python.
Oh, you would be a dream tutor. I'm so jelly.
I try. It's so fun. He's like, I hate Python. And I'm like, but it's so fun once you get it.
Ooh, well, I'm excited to hear about. I will be checking in on this journey every episode until he gets a job. Let's see, what did I do
He's
this
a freshman.
week?
It'll be a while. What'd you do?
I'm working on here. I'll share the link. I made a very quirky link for everybody, aka.ms/ohsnap PowerApps. If you're unfamiliar with what PowerApps are, I got to learn about PowerApps from my good friend Jay. Shout out to Jay on Twitter, and he's also my coworker. He's also a cloud advocate at Microsoft, and he blew my mind this week because Becca, you'll appreciate this. He was able to build my project at Hackbright, which was a delayed social media posting app, in about 15 minutes using drag and drop through this Microsoft tool that we have called PowerApps, which is basically built to enable people who, with low to little code at all, to create apps to help their businesses run really smoothly. And I am so used to, like, I mean, we both know as engineers, like when we build something, we'll set aside like 2 hours and we're like, this is going to take 5 hours because it's going to break. And I'm going to be like, why doesn't this work? Blah, blah, blah. I kid you not. I audibly gasped because I was able to create, because I've worked with the Twitter API before. I've like worked with, and it was not easy, especially when I was a Hackbright grad, but I was able to create an Eventbrite event and automatically have it tweet and announce the event with my own copy and a link to the event and like the name in 15 minutes. I set aside 2 hours to do this. So I'm just telling everybody.
That's good documentation.
Yes. Well, and also it's just, I'm a very visual person. So being able to just like, okay, cool, I log into this and boom. And I'm so excited to write up this blog post and edit this video that I did with Jay because I think it's going to enable a lot of folks, like my use case that I'm thinking of is a lot of my performing artist friends who want to announce like when their streams are going live, but they don't want to do all the social media management that comes with it. I mean, that's just like one of the things that you can build with it, but it's very rare that I'll be like, I audibly gasped because I was like, oh, it worked on the first time? What's wrong? Like, so,
it's so satisfying.
Yeah, it was mind-blowing for me. So that's the link if you want to get a little bit of a head start and do a tutorial yourself, but I'll be posting a video probably later this week. And it will have a cameo from Jay's pug doing a dance that I will probably dub with a Billy Joel song. So I look forward to that content. Okay, now I'm gonna
Our jobs are really different.
Our jobs are very different.
I'm an engineer dubbing, Billy Joel content. It's fine.
Yeah, just making the content. So today we have our first guest, and we are super excited. Anything else we want to touch on before we bring in our guest here? I guess let's share a couple of our stories from our very high highs and very low lows. So let's share. So something I like to say a lot to folks that I mentor or people who used to come to the bootcamp office hours that we did IRL back when we could gather is kind of, well, first of all, I'll say I started the bootcamp office hours because I think it's so important for people to be able to openly talk and communicate with other people going through the same situation, because I think we tend to kind of self-isolate, no pun intended, especially as we all isolate, our fears and our concerns. And the biggest change / light bulb moment for me when I was going through Hackbright was talking about all of my struggles and failed interviews and things that were going on and whiteboard questions that I was things that were happening to me with my cohort mates, because it suddenly made me realize, oh, it's not me. I'm not an idiot. This is hard. And this is a learned skill. Learning how to interview as an engineer, if you're unfamiliar and maybe you're a non-technical person watching this, it's very different. You don't just walk in with your resume and say, I'm a nice person, please hire me. You have to do whiteboarding, which usually involves standing in front of a literal whiteboard, sometimes a Google Doc if you're interviewing at Google, and writing out and talking about solving a particular problem through an algorithm or a function. And really what they're looking for isn't necessarily a right answer. They just want to hear how you talk through the problem and how your brain works and how you're solving it. Now, in the real world, and I'm sure you can attest to this, Becca, when we're engineers and we're coding, we have things like Bing and Google, and we can search for answers for different things that we do, because I don't know about you, but I don't have certain date time things memorized and do all of those kind of things. So yeah, what is, if you want to kind of share your high moment or your low moment with the class, I definitely have mine that are my kind of go-tos, but I think it's important that we share that, yes, Becca and I work at two pretty big tech companies, but there was a lot of failing and falling on our face before we got here.
No, speak for yourself. For me, it was smooth sailing, 100%. Yeah, totally. No. So I finished Hackbright in December of 2017, like a few days before Christmas, and then 2 months later to the day, I actually wound up getting 2 offers, one from Reddit and one from another company. Should I say who? Doesn't matter. It was a fintech company that you've heard of and used, or seen, whatever. And
it was a pretty impressive company. When she told me, I was like,
it was Bloomberg. So they gave me an offer, and I was like, but Reddit, I want to work in the cat meme industry because that's where the fun is, and I was right. But so during those 2 months, it was really interesting. So there were a lot of lows because I was a Middle East studies major with no background that stumbled into a boot camp and was like, oh, this is fun, and then realized I was in way over my head. But the first one I want to bring up was right after finishing Hackbright. My family and we all went to Tahoe for like a week. And I was the worst company ever. I sat there on my computer, like pounding algorithms, like just doing problems because I didn't want to forget everything. And my family was furious with me because I was not using this vacation. And then as soon as I got back, I went and I had coffee with some friends of mine from my cohort. And one of them just looked at me and was like, Becca, you look like shit. What's wrong with you? And I realized that out of Hackbright, I had placed the weight of the world on my shoulders and put all this pressure on myself to like not forget everything. And I'd spent all this money and time trying to learn the skill, and I couldn't take a second off. But like, no, you have to be a person. Yeah. And so that was a really low moment that kind of framed much of what we're going to talk about as we interview a delightful human. So I've heard. I don't really know them that well. / met them 5 minutes ago. But yeah, so that's my kind of low I'll talk about. What about you?
Yeah, well, I told this story a lot especially when I go back to Hackbright and talk about the How I Got My Job panel. So I had my heart set on this job. So first of all, I'll backtrack and say my mentor gave me the most amazing advice, and she said, while I was at Hackbright, and she said, be really, really careful about getting too emotionally invested too soon, which almost sounds like dating advice, so hear me out. There seems to be this tendency, and I did this a lot in theater, where you would go to an audition, or you do this with job interviews where you're like, oh my God, like if I got this job, they have my favorite snack here, and I could ride my bike to work every day, and you kind of like play out this whole scenario in your mind, so then when you don't get the job, it hurts twice as much. And I think what's really important to remember is when you go into a job interview, you're going in with nothing. You're probably going to come out with nothing. If you do come out with something, that's great. Like, that's a great positive, but you're not losing anything. So the reason I say this is I became very emotionally invested in a particular apprenticeship with LinkedIn. I think looking back, the reason I was particularly emotionally invested in this is they explicitly said in their well, first of all, they capped the amount of applicants at 500, and I was able to get in that 500, but they reached the 500 it was something like 12 hours. Like, there were so many people who were gunning for this job. And they said in the description, we will not be doing any whiteboarding. So I was like, yes, this is it. This is how I get it. Because I personally, I really enjoy whiteboarding because it feels like an audition. However,
Totally.
when you audition, you know typically what song or dance or thing you're gonna do in the room. Sometimes they'll give you sides to read, which sides are like a scene, but they let you look over it first, so you're not just thrown into the fire. So I was in this weird situation where I was like, the part of whiteboarding where I have to talk in front of people isn't scary to me. It's just the fact that I am talking about something that I literally just learned in a boot camp for 12 weeks. So I didn't have the confidence that I would going in to sing Popular from Wicked or something like that. So long story short, I really, it's not that I put all my eggs in one basket. I was constantly interviewing all the time, or at least trying to do phone screens to get the on-site interview. And I was waiting to hear back from this LinkedIn apprenticeship. And I always call this the Whole Foods moment, which every single person I've mentored has this moment, where I was in Whole Foods and I got the email that I wasn't moving forward in the process, and I broke down hysterically crying in the middle of a Whole Foods because I was like, that was it. That was what opportunity I would have to get a job. People were looking at me like I was crazy. I kid you not, a week later, I got my job offer at my first company, Code Fresh. So like
Yay!
thank you. So this happens a lot with people that I mentor, and even other women who are in my cohort, where literally the week before you're like, I don't think this is going to happen. I don't know. This just doesn't seem like it's going to be my reality. Maybe I should like think about another career. And then a week later they get the job. So this is really, I tell the story a lot to just tell people like, I've been there. Many people have been there. This is hard. Like, you don't just wake up one day and decide, like, I think I'm going to change careers and be a software engineer. What you're doing is really hard. And my boyfriend, who's been in the industry much, much longer than I have, and someone who's in our comments here, who just shared with us, I have a job interview at Apple next week, and as someone who's been a Mac/Windows/mobile developer for 25 years, it's still scary. It is still mind-blowing to me that in this industry, someone as senior as my boyfriend or as this person here in the comments still has to study for these interviews. It's a completely crazy way of interviewing, and I'm happy to see a lot of companies changing the way they do that, but you're not alone in thinking that, certainly. But yeah, my Whole Foods moment, breaking down crying in the middle of a Whole Foods. Yeah, whiteboarding can be kind of a spooky thing, especially if you've never done it before. I mean, I can't tell you how many very, very senior friends of ours who work at very big tech companies, when they say, oh, I'm like in any other job field, it's like, well, I'm interviewing, and it's like, oh, good for you. But if someone says, oh, I'm interviewing, you're like, I'm so sorry. It's a weird response to give that I've had to adjust my mental state on, that like, if you're going to interview somewhere as an engineer, it is a multi-month process often of trying to prepare.
I think that's true, but I also want to caution folks against the like, oh, whiteboarding is so scary. Like it's a thing. It's a completely learnable skill. Like it's like taking the SATs or any other standardized test. Like you can absolutely study for it, and after you've done enough practice problems, they all look the same. Yeah. Or at least that's how it was when I did this 2 years ago. I wish there was some way that we could talk to somebody that's been through this more recently. Chloe, do you know if we can make that happen?
Oh my gosh, it is so funny you say that, because look who's here.
Oh my God.
Jayce. Hey. We have our first guest. Congrats, you're our first guest. We'll have to send you a certificate of some kind. Welcome, Jayce. So Jayce, I gave a quick little intro earlier on how we met. So Jayce came to the bootcamp office hours at the Microsoft Reactor, and it was Jayce is a person that I often cite when I'm talking about people coming into this industry, because the first time he came to our bootcamp office hours, he was like, I don't know if this is going to happen. Like, this is hard. And I was like, dude, you can do it. And he literally came to, it was either the next office hours or the one after that. And he had like multiple internship offers, like completely 360. Yeah. So yeah, how about we start with a little intro on how you ended up making the career switch and deciding to go to a boot camp and all that fun stuff.
Can we start with who are you, where are you, before those things stuff?
Yeah. So I'm currently in Florida, Miami, Florida, 305. Shout out. Yeah, and I ended up over in Florida because, by the way, I heard about your grandma, and I'm terribly sorry about that. So my grandma's going through something similar with like respiratory and everything. So I decided to come back just to be with her, and then during this entire time, I got kind of stuck here. So fortunate enough, she's still around, but life of them, like just at the edge. But yeah, I decided to stay here. I have family here. I actually have a 1 year and a half daughter, so I had to. I guess this is an opportunity to actually be here with her full time instead of taking the. Well, I'll get there. But yeah, that's who I am. Yeah, it's weird saying that I'm a father now. I feel young.
I still am getting used to saying I work at Microsoft, so I feel you.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to say that you're a mother to your skeleton.
Oh, my skeleton! I
baby that you
should bring him
around
into
with
this
you.
scene later. Yeah, he's
that's
hanging
fun.
out
Later.
back here.
So
Yeah.
what led you to the Microsoft reactor that day?
Yeah.
I was kind of, I was like, I don't know if I'll talk it in the terms of baseball or UFC fight. Like I was on the last match with like
We're
going
musical
through
theater
the.
people. Let's see how this goes.
We can follow along. We can keep up.
We could
I
do
was
it.
like on the. I was like in the last round of my boxing, right? Like just I'm beat up with all the companies rejecting me, and I was just like, you know what? Like I'm not one to give up. I guess that's like inherent in me, like throughout my trials and tribulations through my life. But it was just bad. It was just to the point. I think no, it was a little bit after that where I saw this. I was like, oh, bootcamp hours, cool. Let's see if I can do some interview prep and see what I'm missing. Like see what I'm missing here that I'm not like the secret sauce of saying, hey, here's an offer letter. I didn't know what that looked like. And I saw it and I decided just to show up. I actually was not about to show up because I was like, there's no point. It's a long walk. Well, going up the hills because I lived in San Francisco up in Powell all the way up to California Street. So going up and down is kind of a mission. No pun intended.
May that
But,
be your biggest barrier to entry, folks. May the hills be the biggest thing keeping you out of tech.
Hey, I've decided not to go to events before because my bike would not go up a steep hill in the South Bay. So relatable.
Yeah.
Fair.
So yeah, I decided to go, and I was kind of beat. I was just kind of trying to find answers. It felt like I was kind of going to church. It's just like, who's here in this, communion here that I can talk to and kind of like open this.
And which
up.
boot camp did you go to, Jayce?
So it was actually back in 2017. It was a weird way on how I got into tech. I went through some hard times and I shifted over into a new job. I was selling boats and yachts. I was like a sales rep. And I noticed that their CRM, like customer relationship management tool, was like complete trash. And they didn't want to spend the $100,000 for Salesforce. So, and I told them, I was like, man, we need to fix this. And the owner of the yacht company, the yacht brokerage, was like, cool, thank you for spotting out the problem. And then like after my shift was done, he called me into his office and he's like, here's a $500 bonus, try to find a solution. And knowing him, knowing him was like if I didn't find a solution when I presented the problem, I was gonna be fired. So
It's like survival mode.
yeah. And I was like, okay, cool. Like just kicked into high gear. I was like under a lot of pressure, and I invested those $500 to learn the platform that I was using. It was by Citrix called Podio, and it was just like kind of like drag and drop PHP stuff. And I didn't even know what a text editor was. I didn't even know what an IDE stood for. And so I actually paid someone online to kind of tutor me for like 2 weeks to learn how to do this. And, I came up with, I guess, what we call now, what I know what the word means, an MVP, minimal viable product of this CRM, and it worked. And to make a long story short, I kind of did some iterations back and forth with it. And eventually Ralph Navarro is actually his name from this yacht company. He's like, wow, sales are actually up. And he showed me the stats of like with the sales reps. I actually took my time and dedication to like learn. Mind you, these are like 50, 60-year-old people selling yachts. These are not
Yeah.
like 20-year-olds selling yachts where they can get into tech. They still had those index cards of business. That's how they
Oh, like
kept.
the Rolodex thing.
Yeah. So I had to,
Incredible.
like, I don't know, I guess it was just came natural to me where I was just like, all right, I need to turn this digital and automate this. And I kind of just sat with 2 weeks with them side by side. It's just observing. Like if I was like some like an observer, like what's that Australian person that kind of like the croc hunter?
Oh,
I just
yeah.
observed in their natural
Yeah,
habitat.
Like,
And I was
ooh, they're wearing Patagonia jackets, and what is
No,
this
they're
that
Florida
doing?
men.
Oh,
How is this
Florida.
going?
Yeah.
I'm assuming that the yacht sales were not in San Francisco.
No.
Very Miami. Yeah.
Yeah. So penny loafers and everything. So yeah, I was observing. I converted that, and then the first month of implementing this was like a 10% increase in sales because they were capable of like managing everything. And he's like, "Hey, I'm very happy. Do you want to continue on your education with web development?"
Wow.
And I was like, "Sure." I mean, I didn't even know what a boot camp was, mind you. So I first went to Udemy, and I felt like I was still missing the CS concepts. And I was like, okay. Then
When
I
you say
found.
the CS concepts, what do you mean by that?
Well, at the time, I didn't know what the CS concepts were. I was just like, I feel like this is too, not too, I wouldn't want to say easy, but this is too simple to be explained in a video on Udemy. Like, there's a reason why people are getting paid six figures, like if somebody can just go on YouTube and learn this, like, trade-offs of economics,
Yeah.
like more
So I have
engineers.
to get deeper into this.
Right. I was just curious of learning what's under the hood. And then that's when I came up. Yeah, and I came across this boot camp. It's called UCF, University of Central Florida Boot Camp for web development, and it was a 10-week course. And I was like, okay, cool, I did it. I know how to build something, but I still didn't understand anything. So I was just falling to more curiosity of like, what's under what's under JavaScript, right?
Yeah.
And then under JavaScript was C++ and C, and like these other languages created this. I was like, this is an inception. Like, it's just keeps going lower and lower.
And you wanted to dig into what was happening under the hood. Like you weren't willing to be like console.log, that this is how much JavaScript I know. Console.log, oh great, it prints it to the console, we're good. You were like, how does this work? And let me understand the source code. Oh my God,
Right.
wow.
Yeah.
Who are you?
I'm like loving this growth mindset. Just like I wanted to learn, so I learned more about the learning. It reminds me a lot of when I was very lucky when I went through my boot camp that my boyfriend is very technical and had been in the industry for a while. And when we think back about that time that I was going to Hackbright, he'd be like, "Oh, just console.log," and I'm like, "Yeah, but why and how? I didn't build that. How?" And looking back now, it's like, oh yeah, those were like it drove him crazy because he's like, just don't worry about it. You don't have to worry about it. I'm like, but I don't understand. It's witchcraft.
Right.
That's the best part. It's just witchcraft.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm not one to say yet, but I feel like in order to get better, I don't want to say get good and be like an expert. Like that's the beauty of this, right? I think you have to be in love with learning. Like today you're doing front end and you're just like, well, how does the back end work? And you just start digging into that. And I've noticed some friends of mine that are in tech companies now are like, yeah, I started out at Q&A, right? And now I'm a software engineer, but front end. Now then like the next day they're in like machine learning. So it's, I guess, like curiosity of always wanting to learn is what would bring success to this.
Which is such a strange concept. I know personally, like when I mentor a lot of folks who are coming into tech from other backgrounds, I feel like in a lot of other careers, like for example, I used to be an office manager and I used to be a recruiter, you hit a certain like plateau of learning where you're like, cool, I have my job to a point where I know what I do every Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday and Saturday and Sunday sometimes. But it's been an interesting thing to kind of teach people coming into this industry who, like I feel like the number one question that I get especially from folks looking to make a career change, are, well, what does a typical day look like for you? And I'm like, what day on the calendar of what year? Because it's constantly changing. And I think we're so also used to, family members and my situation's a little bit different with my parents because they were artists, but typically, people will be at jobs for 20 plus years and they get their merit badge for their time put in at the company. And what I think is so cool about tech is it's just like you said, you're constantly learning. You can work in AI machine learning today and work in VR in a couple years. Like it's literally, everything's always being updated, everything is always changing, and it's you cannot be in this industry without that thirst for learning and knowledge, which you so clearly have.
But then you also can't get into the industry unless you can convince somebody to hire you for the opportunity to learn.
That's what I found the most
Yeah. So give us kind of a picture, a snapshot of what kind of changed between that first time that I met you at the reactor to the next time. Because to give everybody some insight, Jayce came back and taught whiteboarding to everybody at a couple of the events later. So what was it was it a mindset that changed or way that you viewed your job search? What do you think it was?
Well, right. So as the curiosity continued to hit, I moved to San Francisco. Long story short, I moved to San Francisco and I got into this program called Make School. It's like a 2-year bachelor's. And the reason what sold me is actually that the CEO and the founder of the school, his mother is Joanna Hoffman. So I was like, okay. Joanna Hoffman was the right-hand woman of Steve Jobs in the whole movie. So that's what kind of so I was like, okay, this is the real deal. And I wanted to be in the Bay Area, and I guess my insights of big tech companies, like the Fang Gang, wasn't really in my foresight, in my future, because I felt like I wasn't worthy, right?
Can we back up for a second? When you said I want to work in tech, for you, was it a given that working in tech means working at Fang? Fang being Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, and Google.
Oh, I have never heard that term before. Fang gang. Interesting. That is my first
All I know is
time.
it's not Fang. All I know is Reddit is not in it. We're like a tiny startup compared to those guys.
At first, I did not have that ambition because I felt like I wasn't worthy of it. I felt I was like, you got to be like MIT, Stanford, Harvard, you got to get in there from the get. I feel like you got to code your way out of your mother's womb to be in those companies. So it wasn't a reality for me, but it was kind of like a dream in a way. And so what pivot that day that I went to the reactor was, I was beat up, like I said. I had just gotten rejected from God knows how many companies, and I just felt like it was actually one specific company that they send me the rejection letter, and they're like, "Hey, we have another spot open. Apply." I'm like, "All right, cool," for the same position, and I was like, "Okay." I applied. I got to the final round. I even flew out to their home base, their HQ in LA, got rejected. I was like, the hell? And then the third time again, I was like, well, this is to me, it's this is disrespectful. At this point, I was like, they don't care about my time. But I felt like beggars can't be choosers, right? I'm begging for a job.
I remember you saying that, when you came to the, and I remember just looking at you being like, you don't understand how close you are. Everything that you're telling me says to me that you're literally a couple weeks away. And this happened to my friend Kimberly as well, where she was like, I don't know if this is going to happen. I'm like, literally a week from now, we're going to laugh at this because you're going to get a job offer. And she did. I feel like right when you're about to just have that Whole Foods breakdown crying moment, once you've fallen on your face, 5 or 6 times, you kind of have to learn how to interview, especially your first time. So I looked Jayce in his eyes and I was just like, you cannot give up. You are so close. You do not understand.
Now that I remember more vividly, it was actually a week before I went to Hack Reactor. I was back home. because I like every month I would fly from San Francisco back to Miami consistently because I have a newborn. So that's a funny thing. Like while my transition into this career, I became a father, and like I was like, oh my god, like I have to I have to get something. I didn't care at the time, but there was like a lot of sacrifices. It was like a lot of like away from my newborn to being in San Francisco and Miami. So it was like insane for me. I was actually homeless in San Francisco. Like I had friends like house me secretly in the dorms because I hope they don't watch this, but
Just name them all and say where the addresses were, just in case.
yeah, I was homeless. Like I had some friends in the military that are around there. I would sacrifice every penny to feed and support my daughter and my significant other at the time. So I would eat MREs, like meals ready to eat from the military, like cooking that up. Like yeah, I was sleeping on the floor, like making sure that this happened. So I flew back, and I remember I had interviewed with Chan Zuckerberg initiative, and I was like, all right, cool. Like I was already rejected by Facebook by the two because you can interview at Facebook for 3 positions at a time. So I already got rejected both because of the other both positions. Google, Shopify got rejected, and I remember I got this phone call, and I was like, oh my god, I think I got it because they never usually reject me when they call. And I was like super stoked. And I actually, before the call, I was so anxious. I actually took my daughter and my girl out to a park, take a walk, like let me relax. And I was so anxious to get back home and get this phone call. And I got the phone call. They're like, yeah, Jayce, how's it going? Blah, 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 blah. I'm like, all right, yeah, cool. Yeah, unfortunately, this isn't a great call, but we have to say that all our spots were filled and the team decided not to move forward. And I was just like, I got the Whole Foods moment. That was my Whole Foods moment. I'm not one to show like emotions like that. So, I told my girls, I'm going to go for a walk. And I was like shivering inside. I went by the stairs right here and I just broke down. I was just like, I failed. And I remember that night, I felt like a complete failure. And then that night I walked over to my daughter's room at night and I was just crying over her crib. Like I felt like a total failure. Like I was like, how am I going to support you? Like maybe I just have to settle for something that's going back to my old career as a paramedic, firefighter, or whatever.
Yeah. Whatever. Paramedic, firefighter. Yeah, that's whatever. Totally.
But something I remember specifically when I first met Jayce at the reactor was he was so, like, I saw such a drive in him, and he kept saying, I invited my friends to this and they didn't come. And he was such a like kind of team player. Like I really saw that like military background in you where like, I cannot believe this was so helpful. And I was like, dude, you're doing a great job. Like we're focused on yourself. You're so close. And I think what's been really magic, because you're about to start your first internship, he's doing 2 back-to-back internships at 2 really amazing companies, is that like when I think back to when we first met, you were in such a different headspace. And this happens a lot when, and I'm sad that we can't all meet in person anymore, but we at least have these videos to just share these stories and be open and vulnerable about those really low points, because there's so many people who have come up to me after the bootcamp office hours and said, thank you. I just needed to be around other people to validate that I wasn't, for lack of a better term, a piece of shit, like, and that I wasn't alone in this, and that this is really hard, and that people here are experiencing the same struggles and issues that I am, because I can't tell you how much of a difference it made for me personally at Hackbright to just be like, hey, I'm going to start a channel in our Slack group where we can talk about jobs, because I'm tired of just keeping this close to my chest and feeling really terrible about it because I suck at this. And everyone's like, I think probably 90% of the women in my cohort ended up joining it. And we still have that channel. We still talk about job search stuff in it. And also, I should say, y'all, for those of you who are joining us live, if you have any questions or anything that you want to ask us, feel free to drop it in the chat and we'll try to address it on the stream. We did get an interesting question here that I would love to just touch on real quick about math, specifically with software engineering, where I know, math, I'm like, I actually linked, and I'll make sure to link in the description as well, to a thread that I did on my personal struggles with math. I recently found out that I have dyscalculia, which is sort of dyslexia with numbers. So I'm truly here to say that you do not need to be a math whiz to do engineering. I think especially for those of us who are coming into this industry, we tend to think like, oh, that's for smart people with numbers and test tubes and, you know, lab coats. But I really cannot stress enough how many times I have used other sources for math things. It should not be a barrier to entry to get into this industry. Becca, you're nodding.
I have a very specific story here. So I work at Reddit, this tiny little company with like 430 million users every month. And I had my team was working on trying to get more people to be able to find content from smaller subreddits and help really small subreddits grow. And what we realized was they were getting lost in our home feed. So I said, great, I will take it upon myself to, with my Middle East studies background and 7th grade algebra / a little bit of calculus, attempt to work on the home feed algorithm for reddit.com, because why not? That makes sense. And I literally did an experiment where it was like, if the subreddit is this size, give it a boost of 75%. And if it's slightly bigger, give it 65%. And it was literally an if-else statement with numbers going from 15 to a million. Like literally a step function, one of the first things you write when you start writing conditionals. And then the experiment worked. And then it went live. And it was being used by the entirety of reddit.com. I then, so I, Middle East studies background, made changes to the home feed seen by like 80 million people every day, casual. So then I present about this at a company meeting. And our CEO says, or when I made the joke about like, I don't know math, you don't need to know math to do this. He was like, yeah, I don't really do math either. This is the guy who wrote created Reddit. Him and Alexa Gannon created Reddit. He goes, yeah, I don't do math either. I just asked Dr. Chris Slow, who was the first engineer at Reddit, who was not one of the founders, who has a PhD in physics and absolutely does math. And so I was like, Chris, Steve just volunteered you to do my math. Will you do my math? And he was like, sure, just send over your like if statement conditionals and I'll like turn it into a log function. And I was like, cool, a log function is a thing. Great.
What a nice resource.
Right. Meanwhile, he goes, but you could get Google Docs to do the same thing. You know that like chart line feature they have on Google Docs? So I went to my product manager and I was like, I think we can get Google Docs to do this. And so he actually figured out how to like rig it up, and we're looking at it and we see there's an equation there and it's like, okay, it's some number, plus some number in X. What does that mean? And I like pull over a guy next to me and I was like, what does this mean? He goes, that says ln, not in. Like we literally could not recognize that it was like the natural log instead of the word in, like inside. That is the degree of math knowledge we have. And yet that is what that equation was powering the home feed on Reddit until we found a different way to do it like 2 weeks later. And meanwhile, there's somebody else in a conference room over going like, Becca, you're doing the math. And I'm like, yeah, we're doing the math. And like, that was the theme of like a week at my job. Like, we're doing math, guys. I can do math. And then the machine learning engineers are just like shaking their heads, but approving my code.
Yeah. Well, I think it really goes to show that like when it comes to this whiteboarding type stuff, that we rely a lot on different tools and things just as engineers in our day-to-day lives. I mean, every time I write a blog post or do anything, even on a technology that I'm very familiar with, I'm always looking at Microsoft Learn. I'm always looking at the docs because if you know everything about everything, then why are you making the content? This, especially beginner content, especially the stuff I do for students, really exists to kind of handhold and help people through these things. So don't feel like you need to be a math whiz to be in this industry.
Somebody else on your team can be a math whiz.
Yes,
you
or
can be the
a Google Doc.
About that interesting edge
or
case.
Outlook, or any sort of Excel spreadsheet. But Jayce, what happened? What was that time period between the like, oh God, this isn't gonna happen, and like, then you showed up and you're like, so I have 3 offers, or I was like, what? What happened?
Yeah. Yeah, it was crazy, I guess. Like, that motivated me. And then going to the reactor and speaking with you, you're just like, dude, you have an amazing story, blah blah blah. Like I spoke about it so nonchalant, like it didn't matter. But I started speaking to you kind of like me. I went home that night and I was like, hey, I do have life experience. I've been an EMT paramedic, military. Like I worked with people, like I worked with teams, and I started picking at all my good qualities. Like I might not be a math whiz. That's another thing. I graduated with a 2.7 GPA from high school. I do not have not have the 5.0 GPAs in math. Yeah. So like speaking to you, I went home that night and I was just thinking, I was like, man, like it's just motivated me. And I guess like, all right, you know what? I know how to fail. I know all the things not to do, and I know the things what to do, and kind of like bring that up. So instead of talking about like, when behavioral interviews, it was actually, I went to the last round at Yelp. I passed all the technicals. I was like, what the hell is happening? The behavioral interviews, I did not pass.
Oh, I passed that one.
Because I didn't know what to talk about. I didn't have that much experience in tech. Like, oh, tell me about a time you had a difficult time working in a team. And I'm like, weather app? Like,
You kind of have to learn how to
question.
answer those questions and how to, what they're looking for, so to speak.
right. So
Whenever I got those questions, I always answered with like, here's a non-technical example, but I've worked on a team before, and here was an issue we were working on, and it had to do with how we explained geography in a curriculum for Sunday schoolers. But like that was the example I brought up because it was about how do you work in teams.
Right. I didn't know that. I didn't know I guess
You got there.
And it was kind of like that epiphany moment. I was like, well, at a difficult time, does it have to be technical? Like, no. So the dynamic started shifting when I started talking about my real world experience, my professional experience before I got into tech. And it was just like, well, I can't handle that stress. Triaging patients or figuring out like how to deal with like when family members come over and, don't want to sound too morbid, but a car accident happens and the family comes over and they want to, how to deal with, chaos and how to delegate responsibilities. And that kind of resonated and kind of flowed into these answers that, I was like, all right, you know what, whatever happens, happens. But then I started getting these emails. Hey, you got the offer. Hey, we want to talk to you. I was like, oh man, I'm gonna get rejected again.
You're like, I've heard this before. I've been burned
I'm just
before.
impressed they're calling you with rejections.
Yeah.
Like, it's always an email or a ghosting. Like nobody calls you to be like, hi, we don't want to move forward with you. We think you're inadequate in every way. Just wanted to really talk to you about that. Like no one does that. I'm so impressed you got phone calls.
So interesting what you said, Jayce, about kind of learning how to answer those questions, about like adding your previous life experience as a non-engineer to answer those questions. Because I was actually just thinking this morning, randomly, I interviewed at a company over, in Silicon Valley for a developer relations job. And one of the questions that they had asked me was, well, what online communities are you involved with currently? And obviously I had not worked as a developer evangelist before. And I did not get that job offer. But if I could go back in time, what I wish I would have said was, oh, I was an actress and I've done a lot of community theater work, and here's all the online communities that I've worked with in the theater world, as that could be applicable to the same kind of industry. But I think sometimes we don't make those connections. And it's just like what we were talking about last week, Becca, about you probably and may not see the really cool, awesome parallels that your previous experience in whatever industry you were in that you can bring to tech. So sometimes just like talking with a mentor, talking with a friend to be like, what are these qualities? Like, what do I see that maybe or what do I not see that maybe other people see in me? So I think that's amazing that you were able to, because especially like a lot of your experience that you had explained to me about your work, working in the military and all your previous experience, I was like, this is very relevant. Like you may not see it, but it is.
Yeah, so I kind of like, in testing, A/B testing, that's what I did. I was like, hey, you know what, with this company, I'll talk about it. With this company, I won't. And then I started A/B testing like that, and the ones that I did, I was like, this works. And I actually did I kind of taught like interview prep at a boot camp here in Miami. It's called Wing Code. And I tell all the boot campers, because when they come, they're like, oh man, I don't know, I don't think I'm good enough. And I was like, what were you doing before? And they're like, oh, I was a teacher. I was like, you have patience. Like,
Yeah.
you know how to work with people, and like that's a superpower. And like not to badmouth like students that are, people that want to go the traditional route, but I mean, I don't know. I'm just saying. I'm speaking out of turn, but they don't have that real life experience. Like they don't have that. I worked with people like before, like, or maybe you have at a school project, but I don't think you've had money involved. Where like your livelihood is involved here, or you know, and that to me, to anybody that's watching now, it's like that's your superpower. Like use that. Kind of go back and think about a time that you actually had a difficult time at your receptionist job, or working at Publix, or wherever, and you're like,
Totally.
wow, that customer was a total jerk and I handled that very well.
Yeah.
That's something that I think it surfaces a lot in interviews too, because when you're interviewing out of a boot camp, like nobody expects anything of you technically, right? Like
Right.
you're basically expected to be able to talk out loud and ask questions, but they're like, and we'll have a hiring manager on actually in a few weeks to talk about what interviewers are looking for. But like all you have to prove is that you are good enough at the basics and good enough at learning the rest of it that you're worth hiring. So
And
more
that you
than
have
anything
the
else,
potential to learn,
Yeah.
and which, like, obviously, Jayce, if I had interviewed you, I'd be like, oh yeah, like, especially if you had shared some of this insight from your previous experience. Like, I think, especially, Becca and I talk about just how uncomfortable it can feel and still feels to call yourself an engineer when you first start out in
Right.
this industry. It feels very alien and foreign because you're just like, what? Like, me? Are you sure?
I'm
Like,
2 years in, I still feel that way.
I always feel like my Scooby-Doo villain's mask is going to be pulled off at any moment. They're going to be like, haha, you've just been an actress pretending. But of course, oh my gosh, you're a potato.
You're not an engineer, you're a potato. I've been wanting to do this entire conversation. Like an potato.
Well, you
I
gotta
just
wait.
felt
And I think that, it's so important to realize that we all, at some point, I mean, some of us are very, very lucky, not me, but, we get to go to a computer science, get a degree and do the whole official process. But I meet so many amazing, some of the best engineers that I work with or mentor didn't even get close to getting a CS degree, and literally their drive and passion. I always tell people who go through boot camps and are self-taught and work in this industry should get an automatic like badge of honor that they survived it. Because going to a boot camp, you don't just wake up one day and you're just like, I just think I'm going to do a career change. Like, clearly you moved across the country and you made this huge investment in your time and energy. So of course you're going to have an emotional breakdown, if things are going south. But I hear that we have another guest speaker who may join us on this call, Jayce. Are they available to speak with us?
Yeah, let me.
And
A very
Bring her.
important woman in tech, I hear.
Yeah, she's
Definitely.
she babies are code.
So
Give me
one of
one
the
second.
most wonderful things about Shelter in Place is all of the baby and dog cameos that we've been getting. So I think we're going to get a cameo from Jayce's very cute daughter. Let's see if we have any questions here. Let's see. Some amazing insight here about math and tutoring kids. This is awesome and just so validating to hear that you can in fact survive in this industry without being a math whiz or genius. Oh my gosh! Hello!
hi.
Oh my gosh!
What's
it's our
your name?
second
Here?
guest. So cute.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah, definitely being a potato again.
She's like, what?
My cousins did the same thing on a call yesterday. Oh,
Like,
okay.
ma'am? Yeah.
Okay.
So
Okay. No potato, no good.
We have a little less than 10 minutes left. Are there any closing thoughts that we want to make sure we cover, or even questions if people want to drop them into the YouTube comments here?
I have a question that I want to propose to the group, which is,
Sure.
how did you decide what types of companies to even seek out, as far as big, small, as far as location, as far as what kind of stuff they did? Like, what were some of the factors you looked into to help figure out what to apply to get the constant stream of initial rejections?
That is a great question. Personally, I had gotten advice from a really wonderful person named Nemo, who I had worked with at PAX Labs previously, who was like, rapid fire out applications, just like get as many job interviews under your belt so you can just practice interviewing. So that's really how I viewed it. I think in my mind, I was thinking, okay, I either want to work at a big tech company like that LinkedIn apprenticeship, or something specifically designed where they would know that I was coming in with little experience and I needed kind of a little bit of hand holding. So a big question I asked at every single job interview, big or small. I of course ended up taking my first job at a very small startup where I knew there'd be a lot of mentorship. Was, what does mentorship look like here? Because it's very, very different to say, yeah, we have an engineer on the team who really wants to be a good, who wants to take an engineer under their belt. I've seen this before with folks that I've mentored. And then you get there and it's like, okay, what do I do? And engineers get busy and they don't have the time. So a big question I would ask is, have you mentored junior candidates before from a boot camp? What will it look like when I onboard here? Because in theory, yeah, a lot of people want to, bring on a junior candidate, but they have to have the bandwidth and resources to do it. So for me, I wasn't really picky about the size necessarily, if it was a startup or a Facebook, Airbnb kind of thing. It was more, do they have the resources and support? So things like the Pinterest apprenticeship program looked really appealing to me, and the LinkedIn one obviously, but I just needed a place that they would know that I was coming in junior and would have the time and resources and bandwidth to make sure that they knew that I was a junior candidate. How about you guys?
I guess I go. I got motivated, and then I got to the point where, like, you know what? I have made so many sacrifices to be at this point. I'm not going to settle for anything less.
Yes.
So I kind of like strategized of what companies I wanted to at the end, like which companies I really wanted. And what I forgot to mention this, back in April of last year, I went to a meetup at Twitch. I didn't know what Twitch was whatsoever at all. I don't even play, like, the last video game console was Halo, the first one with Xbox. And I went to this company and I was like, wow, this company is awesome. I was like, whoa.
And their offices are very cool.
Right. And I was like, wow, I want to get back into gaming. So I knew I wanted to work at Twitch. Oh, by the way, yes, I did get the 2 offers at Twitch and Facebook.
Yeah, buddy. Which one did you take?
Crazy.
He's doing both.
Back to back, yeah.
Back to back, yeah.
Which one?
Summer and fall. Summer is Twitch and fall would be Facebook. So I remember I set my mind to, I want to work at Twitch. It's gonna happen. I don't know how. So I set up all the companies before that I knew I was gonna get rejected, just to get some experience of getting hit in the face, getting rejected, and like what whiteboarding looked like, etc. And then with Facebook, I knew there was 3 positions. I picked the least one that I didn't want to the one I did want. So I kind of strategized that way. And it got to a point where, like, I'm not going to settle for anything less besides these 2. But yeah, and then and then I kept going through the ringer, and I got the offer, and I was just like, I was excited, but at the same time, I was like, yeah, I knew it. Now, what else can I accomplish?
I felt the same way. I felt totally the same way. That's so real.
Yeah.
Right. I was like, what's next?
And that's what I tell a lot of people who come to our office hours, that look, when people used to say this to me when I was interviewing post boot camp, I would be like, okay, I would roll my eyes. People, like my boyfriend, would be like, you don't have to take the first job offer you get, because you start to feel very desperate, like, I'll take anything, whatever the first one I get, I just need money, I need a job. But time and time again, I have seen people take a job that isn't necessarily the right match for them, and they're just like, beggars can't be choosers, I have to take this, and then 3 months later they're having to do the whole process over again because they didn't have the resources to mentor them and assist them. So I think, especially for your first role, you really need you may not feel like a valuable resource, and you're just like, there's no way I'm going to get a
I'll
job. I
take
have to take
anything.
whatever. I'll take anything. You really have to think about like, okay, is this going to be a good home for me for,
Totally.
7 months, a year, whatever, because this is your first stepping stone. And oh my goodness, if you've ever whiteboarded or gone through this process, I will say it gets better after the first one. If you have at least one thing on your resume, it gets a little bit easier, but you don't have to do it all over again.
Yeah, what I'll say about the search, something that I did is I went to Indeed and I searched for junior engineering roles, and then I found anybody I knew that worked at any of those companies got a referral. But I also kind of eagle-eyed Reddit. I wasn't a Redditor, but I heard Steve Huffman speak and was like, yep, there's a puppy. Hi,
So
puppy.
many cameos.
Jayce has the best guest.
Our third guest. I told Meg she was going to be our second guest next week, but I guess she'll be the fourth.
Liar. Yeah, right. But one of the things I want to mention is that specifically, I knew that I didn't want to work anywhere that was not in Oakland or San Francisco. And so when there was a company on the peninsula that came to our demo night and was open to interviewing, I said, excellent, your office is in San Bruno. I don't want to work for you. I can do a no pressure interview. And so strong recommendations to find those practice companies that you don't really care about, and like try to get interviews there, and then you can go in without worrying. Actually, that's how the Bloomberg job came about. It was my first technical phone screen ever, and I asked a friend to refer me because she like loved her job at Bloomberg, and I was like, okay, cool. And it turned into a great experience and an offer because I didn't have any pressure on myself.
Yeah. And as I've learned from some folks who've been on the How I Got My Job panel, sometimes your like practice company or your throwaway company ends up being not your forever home, because we all end up switching jobs at some point, but you never know. Sometimes a startup that you're just like, I'll view this as a test run, can end up being a place you end up being pleasantly surprised by.
Totally.
All right.
Yeah, I did want to mention this. Like after I got these offers, I went to, it was for a full-time role, by the way, for VMware. And I was like, okay, cool. Sure, I'll interview online, and I guess I have to go out of pocket. But I guess the reality of like being a software engineer, like interviewing as a software engineer as a whole, came to be that they were paying for my flight, they got me a hotel, and they got me a car. I was like,
Ooh.
is this real?
You're like, am I Richie Rich?
Right. It was just crazy to me. Like,
I
even
interviewed
to
at
this
Amazon,
day,
and they said one of their values was frugality, and they put me up in a 5-star hotel, and I was like working at a nonprofit in Mississippi with a $10 a day per diem, and they gave me a $75 a day per diem, and I like ate oysters on Amazon's dime while they're being frugal. And I was like, what
right.
is this?
That's also a thing that I feel like is a huge adjustment for folks coming from the non-tech world, because I had worked in tech as an office manager, or in a recruiter, so I kind of knew like the world, so to speak. It's Silicon Valley, in particular, Bay Area, very, very strange. But my Hackbright cohort got invited to Eventbrite for an event, and for me, I knew like, oh yeah, all the drinks in the fridge are free, but there were some women not in my cohort, but in some of the other cohorts who were like, wait, we don't have to pay for this? Like the LaCroix is free? And I was like, oh, welcome to tech. Like it's a bizarre, and of course the Bay Area is a unique beast, I will say. Even if you go to New York, it can be even different. But I think there's even just some adjustments to the culture and the life of working, even at a startup versus a Facebook or a Airbnb kind of thing. All right.
I haven't gotten there yet.
Well, you're getting close. Pretty soon, Jayce. Jayce is gonna be my boss someday. I just feel it. So we are at 5:02. So I am going to wrap it up here. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jayce. We have so many amazing people saying just how relatable your story and journey is, and I cannot wait for more people to see this, even beyond the live stream. Okay, first of all, good luck in your first week, which is coming up. So excited.
May 4th.
Yeah.
May the 4th be with you.
We're going to have you come back after you've been there a month or two and be like, so how's it going?
In the trenches.
Exactly.
I'm dying. I don't know how to do anything. So it's going to be here for 3 months.
All my PRs got rejected.
I broke everything in production. That'll be really fun to do. Where are they now with Jayce in June?
Love it.
A quick teaser for next week. We are going to have Meg Duffy on, who is amazing. I just read her awesome workbook on making a career change. And I'm so excited to have her talk about just what to think about and what kind of processes and things and your mindset you should be in for that. So we will be posting some links for that. And I guess this is it. Is there any parting thoughts you want to share, Becca, before we turn the switch off here?
I have a really goofy show and tell that I feel a need to show.
Go
it's not
for
what I
it.
told you earlier. You mentioned the word Switch. So I've been really depressed that I couldn't buy a Switch because they're sold out everywhere. So I've been playing my childhood GameCube. And like games from like the early 2000s, including like a Tony Hawk skateboarding game that has a San Francisco level that like it's like the Embarcadero in the year 2000, like before all the tech companies had moved in.
Oh my
Super
gosh.
interesting. But one of the games that came for free with the console at Costco was Super Mario Sunshine. And I opened it to play it recently, and I found an ad for this game. I don't know if you can see it. I'm going the wrong way. But there's this ad for a game like 25 years ago with Animal Crossing. And so I don't have Animal Crossing on GameCube, but I do have an ad for Animal Crossing on GameCube from 20 years ago. So I feel like I'm a part of this. That's
I love it. Jayce actually sent me a very funny Animal Crossing
Oh,
video
yeah.
earlier today.
I was just thinking about it.
I apologize to everyone who I'm giving FOMO to with my Animal Crossing tweets, but it is truly, my real life is my alternate reality, and my real life is my Animal Crossing life. Casey! That means nothing to you guys. Cool, y'all. Okay, well, we will be posting a bunch of links in the description below once I rewatch this in a day or two and add them there. And thank you again, Jayce, for sharing your story. I'm
Thank you for having me.
so excited to see. Yeah,
Thank you.
And it's also just so wonderful because Becca and I interviewed years ago, so it's fascinating to hear that the process has not changed that much, but it's also just very reassuring to hear that even now, recently, that making this career change is doable and is something that I really think that your story is going to inspire a lot of folks to
That's
keep
awesome.
going.
Yeah. Final thoughts, if I may. Like,
Yeah.
I think if anybody's still out there, like struggling, like getting jobs or whatever, just know why you started, and like kind of have like kind of like your own AA meetings, if not join the the Microsoft Reactor too. Like that's it. It gave me clarity of my value.
Yeah.
And I think that would help people out too. Like, this is your value. Like when you go in there, like don't be afraid to. I know it sounds super cliche because like I'm in a different position than I was, but don't be afraid to get rejected. Like, just go in there saying, what, screw it. If I get rejected, whatever. Like, you're lost.
Nothing changes.
You're FOMO.
Yeah.
Like, the worst that can happen is being at the same spot you were before you applied.
It's so rare to just walk in somewhere and nail it on the first try. And I think especially when there's so much at stake, because, all of us make these career changes because we want to make a major change in our life. And it's a huge time and money investment, and I couldn't agree more. I think vision boards are really helpful, just those visual reminders that you can even look at before you go into an interview to remember how you got here. Keeping a journal to just see how far you've come, because it can be really hard. There was actually a visual that I'll link to in the show notes of that they had in the bathroom of Hackbright, and I think they still do, of this like iceberg of success where the peak above the water is like what everyone else sees, and then the iceberg under the water is like what really happened, and it's like all the failures and struggles and issues that you run into along the way. So just know that you're not alone in this, and this is hard. This is really hard. All right, I'm going to officially sign off. Thanks, y'all. We will see you on the interwebs next Wednesday at 4 with Meg. Super excited.
Yay.
And thank you, Jayce. Bye, Becca.
Right, thank you so much, Jayce. It's awesome. Bye, everyone. Bye, Chloe.
Bye. Okay, let's see.